Hey guys, Jameson here. I just wanted to take a minute to have a more candid video about meaning. Because the more that this channel grows and the more musicians that I talk to and the more variety of music that I talk about, the more this idea of meaning comes up. And more particularly is how we make meaning out of the music we listen to. And then probably more importantly is, what does that have to do with musicology, and why does musicology even matter? Why do we need musicologists? And I'm actually going to start on probably a pretty unremarkable note that we don't need musicologists. When you have an ist, right, when you have someone who specializes in something, there can almost be an implied or assumed, depending on which direction it's going, importance, sense of importance, that, what I'm doing as a musicologist is required to make meaning. But before I get ahead of myself, while I want to definitely put on the table that musicologists aren't needed for meaning, meaning itself is a fundamental part of the music experience. I'm going to take an ethnomusicological concept from the ethnomusicologist Merriam, where he laid out three concepts of music, right? Three pretty much universal concepts of music across all of the human cultures that have music, which would be all of them. And these three categories are the sound itself, the behavior, and concepts. The sound is pretty self-explanatory. The sound, what are we hearing? What am I listening to? Right now I'm listening to the traffic that is giving a pretty gentle white noise behind the voice, and then that's probably a motorcycle in the distance. The behavior would be, how do we make music, right? What are the performances like? What are the contexts for the rituals that music is associated with, right? So there's sound, which is the actual sound of the music, is the behavior, is how we make that music, right? What is the behavior surrounding that music that we're listening to? But then concepts is pretty much just another word for meaning, right? And concepts implies that there is an intrinsic part of the music experience that involves us talking about it, right? And not only talking about it, but formalizing ideas around the why of the music that we make, right? And this is actually pretty much what musicology and ethnomusicology focus on the most, I would say. Definitely behavior is a big part of it. Sound tends to be just music theorists and maybe even composers. But, I would argue, at least in my experience as a PhD student in ethnomusicology, is that a lot of what we do is actually on the concepts, as we discuss what meanings people make out of the music that they listen to. And so taking these core concepts of music and applying it to musicology, if every culture around the world has this idea of concepts where we make meaning out of the music that we listen to by talking about it, that means that we also tend to have people who, it's sort of their job, right, to at least keep track of the meaning that we do have with the music. And I guess in that way, a musicologist and an ethnomusicologist is just our way of making that role an institutionalized profession. I want to make it very clear that just because something is made into a profession or institutionalized does not mean that those people certified to do it have a monopoly over making meaning out of music, right? Instead, it is a part of all of us, and I would even, I would actually argue that the big differentiator between ethnomusicology and musicology is that ethnomusicologists fully acknowledge that we alone, the musicologists, cannot make the meaning, right? And the ethno is part of the fact that we actually go out into real life and talk about this music with the people who make it, the people who listen to it, the people who study it. So ethnomusicologists, I think even by default, admit that we don't have ownership over making meaning, and that we're only one part of the puzzle. And to that end, I want to also make the argument that while we do not have monopoly, right, a lot of people ask, why musicology, right? What is the point of a musicologist if we can all make meaning out of this? And this also came up not only in a lot of the interviews recently, but also when I was reading Andrew Miller's The Northern Silence, which is just an incredible book. And he did a BBC segment on Sibelius's Tapiola, and he admits on the page that he got a lot of questions or a lot of criticisms like, Tapiola speaks for itself. It doesn't need you to speak for it. Which is kind of funny because music actually does need us to speak for it. Music doesn't have inherent meaning, right? It requires us to talk about it to make meaning out of it. But that's a really old, archaic, like, absolute classical music concept, that music does speak for itself. It never does. And then that leads me to the other thing where, like, if you're thinking, well, we don't really need meaning, I can guarantee you everyone watching this video listens to music in part because of the meaning that you gain from it, or the meaning that it expresses, right? Very few people listen to music only for the sounds. That's very rare. Music will almost always mean something to the people who are listening to it, and especially the people who are making it. So if you want to take those together, there is merit in having people who specialize, right? Because while I learn all the time from talking to you guys that we're all completely capable of making meaning for ourselves, the merit to having someone who makes a profession out of it, as in can dedicate way more time to it than is normal, right, or is typical, is that by learning and dedicating to it, we gain more context, right, and more knowledge. I think the most recent conversation I had with Chell Broughton was a great example of this, where Chell is another individual who has dedicated so much time into not only playing and listening to music, but learning about music from around the world. And that context that is gained from that dedication to it helps put things into a broader perspective, or brings in different perspectives that, let's say a whole bunch of people who listen to Vardruna get together and talk about Vardruna, but they really only listen to Vardruna. That meaning is valuable, right? And those experiences are not, any less meaningful. But there's something to be said about being able to put what you're listening to and how you're listening to it into the context of broader knowledge of how music works around not even just the world, but maybe even just around your own country, right? So if you want to take the horizontal view, is that, especially ethnomusicologists, with the profession of it, we absolutely put more time into understanding that horizontal perspective of music at this time being made around the world. But then more traditional musicology, which I also do, has this more vertical approach with time, where there's also so much that can be learned when you actually look at how music has changed over time, or sometimes even more interestingly, how it hasn't changed over time. So with these different perspectives, right, this horizontal of music over place, and the vertical, the music over time, these give us so many different perspectives and, ways to talk about music that we wouldn't have if we only stayed in our own little bubble, right? But this also doesn't mean that a musicologist inherently has more broad perspectives or more broad knowledge. It mostly will. But, you also have musicologists who hyper-focus on one thing and refuse to, look at anything outside of that thing they really love. And this is the type of musicologist I really tried to never be. Please put me out of my misery if I ever become that, right? Now, where I want to take all this conversation, right, and if I can sum it up, because I know this is an informal video, it's not scripted, I've got notes, but this is just stuff that I really just wanted to talk about and maybe start a conversation to continue to encourage making more meaning, is there's this symbiotic relationship when you take people who specialize in meaning, musicologists, if I can, put it in probably a way that other musicologists will shame me for, and actually talk to the musicians. This is the whole basis of how this channel works, is when you have someone who specializes in meaning making, and then you have someone who specializes in making the music that we make meaning out of, and you have them talk for a little bit. I just think that the amount of knowledge and potential for meaning just grows exponentially as that conversation goes on. And I like to think that if, the comments and your guys' feedback is anything worth measuring, right, which I very much think it is, is that this actually does make a difference in not only how we listen to music, but the relationship we have with music. Where we're in this day and age where everything is so superficial. We're in this day and age where everything needs to be fast, right? We're scared of forming meaningful relationships, and that's not just with people, it's also with the art and culture that defines us, right? And so in this age that really wants you to just have almost a purely commercial or transactional relationship with music, I just think the most powerful way to resist that paradigm is to continue to have a deliberate and intentional relationship with the music that we make and the music we listen to. I think there's something beautiful in that, where it resists saying, no, I will not only buy this music, I will make meaning out of it for myself. And the reason that's dangerous to the institutions in power is because when art helps us make meaning, that's when we start to get radical ideas, not even radical ideas. You know, we've all seen it firsthand at Midgårdsblot when we gather around the fire and we actually see what life could be if life is stripped down to its bare essentials, and we talk about that. You know, that habit of us seeing that we don't need all of these things, or that life might be better off if it was simple, that's dangerous. But that also occurs out of meaning. But then if we can bring it back from that, meta side of, smashing the state and bringing down the walls, to instead just talking more specifically about music, I just know for a fact that those of you who watched the Einar Selvik interview are now going to listen to Birna with a different perspective than you would have if we didn't have that opportunity to talk to Einar about the music, right? And so go from that cosmic approach of resisting this degradation of meaning in our lives around us, to this more specific situation that talking about this music gives us more ways to like the music that we listen to. On both of those levels, meaning is a fundamental part of music. So I guess to wrap it up here, what I mostly want to say is that, musicologists don't have a monopoly on it, as I said, but we do have something to offer that would be missing if musicologists just went away, right? And that's not for the sense of fluffing us up to be more important than we are. It's actually more about dealing existentially with why I do what I do, and really just fielding out these perspectives and these, ideas that I have to, see if any of this is resonating with you guys. So I just want to stick my flag in the ground to say that, musicology matters, but it doesn't matter because we're smarter. We're not. It just matters because I think it's really important to have people who are able to dedicate a full work week's worth of time to reading about music, listening to music, and understanding how it works in a broader way than most of us have the time for. And that creates this symbiotic relationship between musicologists, musicians, the people who listen to it, and the meaning. Because I will end saying one more time, music does not have meaning on its own. Some people can say that it does, but I'm pretty confident saying that without us talking about the music that we're listening to, there is no meaning. And that's the value in talking about it, and having people to foster that discussion about how music is giving us meaning, or how we're making meaning out of the music that we listen to. So, thank you guys for watching. Please let me know down in the comments if anything that I said here resonates with you at all, or if at the very least you got a different perspective on what exactly it is on a meta level that musicologists do, or thinking more intentionally about meaning in the music that we listen to. So, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time when I post the interview with Songleiker with Ingrid and Maria Franz, where this conversation about meaning and the role of musicologists becomes all the more front and center. Thank you guys for watching.